Have you ever dreamed of a school shooting happening and you stopping said school shooter with your bare hands and everyone thanks you and you're a hero and the girl of your dreams hugs you and says, "Oh my god, thank you, Anon-kun, you did it!" If this scenario never occurred to you when you're sitting bored in math class, maybe this video isn't for you. And that's okay. But for the people that dreamed of this since they were kids and still dream of it all these years later, you might want to stick around. That drive to save the girl of your dreams, the one that you never actually had the nerve to talk to, is exactly what convinces a nation's youth, especially young men, to sign up for war, even if it means they're becoming cannon fodder and dying in the most excruciating pain possible. But time and time again, young men are up for the challenge. When their country's equivalent of Big Sam calls upon not their name but a vague general description of them, they answer. The answer is because it's really easy to become a fascist. All it takes is the wrong coffee table book. I was reading this book called Sun and Steel at my Asian friend's house, and I unknowingly became a Japanese nationalist that very weekend. I was talking about dying for the emperor and honoring my samurai code, and I only snapped out of it when I found the author was gay. But we'll talk about him later. Instead, let's talk about why you might be a fascist and you don't even know it. According to the dictionary definition, fascism is a far-right ultranationalist ideology led by a dictator who uses force to control society, suppress opposition, and promote extreme nationalism while rejecting democratic principles. However, it wasn't always defined like this. Actually, it was never defined coherently at all, but rather marketed as a promise of national rebirth and social harmony, away from the horrors of the old world. Early fascists presented themselves as the saviors of their nation. They aimed at liberating the working class that had been suppressed by the flaws of their society for too long. They even targeted the elites and the aristocrats by reminding them of their great heritage and return to glory. Even the freaks and degens were promised a new way to express themselves as well. That's why fascism in its early days in the turn of the century had a considerable amount of support going into it by all kinds of people. For example, the British fascists, founded in 1922, during the same time Benito Mussolini became Prime Minister of Italy, was led by a female homosexual war veteran named Rotha Lintorn Orman. It didn't last because Rotha was an alcoholic degenerate that died alone, but the reason I mention her is because it showcases that anyone can be a fascist. Early fascism was remarkably flexible and opportunistic. Unlike new ideologies like Marxism or socialism, which are built on coherent theories about history and economics, fascists simply grabbed whatever ideas worked and threw them together. It wasn't a systemic philosophy you could study or debate. It was a collection of emotional appeals designed to rage bait or love bait the masses. That's why it looks so different in every country. It looked like fascism in Italy, or Nazism in Germany, or Kokashugi in Japan. But it's all the same, really. Speaking of Japan, remember the gay author that I was talking about that almost convinced me to become a Japanese ultranationalist and vow to die for the empire? That author is named Yukio Mishima, who's actually PewDiePie's favorite author. That's not a fun fact, by the way. I'll talk about PewDiePie later. But anyways, Yukio Mishima was born in 1925 in Tokyo, Japan, during a time when Japanese culture was in a state of transition. On one hand, traditional values rooted in the legacy of the samurai, Shinto beliefs, and a strict social hierarchy remained deeply influential. However, on the other hand, Japan was rapidly modernizing and absorbing Western influences through industrialization and urbanization that started during the Meiji period in the late 1800s, but stalled during the war years. Being the son of a government official, Mishima grew up pretty wealthy for the time. But because of his frail physical condition and the fact his overbearing grandmother took care of him most of his childhood, he grew up kind of a pussy. This all culminated during World War II when he wasn't accepted into the Imperial Army to represent his nation because he didn't pass the physical exam because he had been misdiagnosed with tuberculosis. Or maybe he was capping, who knows. But regardless, these early influences would later be reflected in Mishima's fictional work, where he grappled themes of aesthetic beauty and nationalism, as well as the struggle between traditional ideals in contemporary life. When Japan surrendered in World War II and the emperor made a speech that stated that he was not the divine being of great lineage that was destined to rule over the people of Japan, and that, well, he's just a guy, this marked Japan's symbolic shift from a fascist status state to a modern US-backed democratic society with a constitutional monarchy. But pause for a second. In only a matter of decades, how do you go from shouting, "Cody to the motherland," to essentially being the United States' bitch? That's the identity crisis Mishima grappled with throughout his entire work. Growing up, in Mishima's eyes, the willingness to die in battle was tied directly to the belief in the emperor's divinity. The sacrifices made by the Japanese soldiers during the war were for something greater than the nation itself, that they were doing it for the honor of serving a true divine god in Emperor Hirohito. So when Japan lost and the emperor outed himself a bitch, Mishima was cooked. What now? In 1968, amidst a rise of leftist student protests that sought to free Japan from US influence in favor of socialism and sometimes communism, Mishima formed what he called the Tate no Kai, which is pretty much just a bunch of nerds role-playing samurai. They trained in kendo and weight training, all in the name of protecting the emperor. On November 25, 1970, with his 4 most trusted members of the Tate no Kai, Mishima stormed into the Tokyo headquarters of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, kidnapping the commander of the Japanese army base, barricading himself in a conference room, and reading his manifesto, demanding the Japanese people make the emperor the undisputed ruler once again. He punched the air, lecturing the soldiers about their cowardice, and nobody cared. Their boos are louder than whatever he was waffling about, and then Mishima fucking killed himself. He cut his own belly open in the most traditionally honorable way possible. He committed seppuku and bled out, all in the name of the emperor. And everyone collectively went, what the fuck was this motherfucker thinking? Now, the official record that the news reported went on to say that Yukio Mishima was an outright fascist that decided he wanted to commit suicide in a grandiose way because he truly believed in his emperor's divinity and wanted to restore his glory in the only way he knew how. And I get this perspective. Throughout his entire life, he openly idolized the samurai code and literally tried to spark a coup d'etat to restore imperial authority. However, to me, his obsession with trying to restore an empire that had been dead for like almost 30 years at this point was strictly more for vibes than anything political, in my opinion. He just wanted to do it because I don't know, it was a pretty fire aesthetic. Why do I think this? Well, it's because he writes good. He's like poetic and shit. His novels meditate on beauty, the body, even him visiting nightclubs for research and existential longing in ways that, in my opinion, transcend rigid ideology. Even his final act of loving the emperor and committing seppuku in his honor was half political manifesto, half performance art. Ever since he was a kid, Mishima had always been insecure of his small and frail stature. That's why in his 30s, he started an intense workout regimen that made him go from a twink to pretty good physique. When James Dean died at the age of 24 in a car crash, Mishima wrote an article called On the Beautiful Death of James Dean. The first sentence being, the beautiful should die young, and everyone else should live as long as possible. So maybe he died not as a martyr for a political statement that had been outdated for like fucking 30 years, but maybe because he wanted to not die old and ugly instead. Maybe there wasn't any real coherent political reason other than being old fucking sucks. At the height of Mishima's career in the 60s, the Japanese way of life had already moved past the die for your emperor military mindset and was instead focused on the rapidly growing economy and the technological advancements of the country. The Japanese were satisfied with their new democracy, the economy was booming, and they were too busy and overworked to launch a fascist takeover once again. Whereas the media and art in that era reflected the rapidly evolving Japan, Mishima's most popular works were actually about old Japan. Even at the height of his popularity, he was still eclipsed in terms of mainstream attention by various other Japanese writers, and even now, 50 years after his death, he's never quite achieved the level of critical acclaim as some of the other great Japanese writers. Even now, Mishima is only kind of popular with white guys disillusioned with rural American life that go to Japan to get married to unsuspecting Japanese women as part of the Oxford study, as well as male Japanese senior citizens that have been denying Japan's war crimes for the last 80 years. Unfortunately, Japan has become too good of a country for fascism to affect it like it did at the turn of the century. That's why a revolution isn't coming, and nothing is gonna happen. You think the average Japanese person gives a fuck about their national history? These kids are trying to get a company job so they can hopefully make enough money to have children with high autism odds in their 40s with a previously divorced wife they got through a marriage fair. They're not thinking about the motherland like they used to. These people will slowly rot in their office jobs and pass out after missing the last train in front of a bunch of Pocari sweats until their birth rates decline enough that the women start dressing like whores and hitting the club just to raise the community hormone levels of the country. I love Japan. It's a beautiful culture, really. With globalization and tourism reaching its peak as Japan solidified itself as a top tourist destination, nationalism in the fascist sense is never going to be mobilized in a country like that. With Mishima, we learned that the old way of riling people up just doesn't work anymore. People are not desperate in the way they were. People are not ignorant on matters involving national security either. So trying to rile up the Japanese people to an emperor that slighted out to General MacArthur? You need to think outside the box, my friend. Is that Kanye music?
There was something about when I put this hat on, it made me feel like Superman. You made a Superman. That's my favorite superhero. And you made a Superman.
Kanye is interesting to me because of how goated he remains even after all these years in the game. 20 years since his debut, he's still regarded as one of the GOATs, even though he's technically an old head as he's only 2 years younger than 50 Cent, and surprisingly is 6 years older than Lil Wayne. However, even though those artists are legends of the game, it's clear that the youth these days don't long for their music like they do with Kanye. And that's because Kanye's musical inspiration and topics generally stem from the position of his life that he's supposed to embody as an artist. When he first started making headways in his music, his topics were about dropping out of college, going against the grain, being hungry for success, which are topics that almost all upcoming artists talk about. But when the next phase of his career started, where he became established as a mainstream superstar, it was still a seamless transition as well. He made bangers like 808s and Heartbreak, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Watch the Throne, Yeezus. Every step of the way, he was interesting, and he painted a beautiful picture of the trajectory of his career. However, even the most recent albums tackling his superstardom are almost a decade old at this point. He's been a superstar for well over 20 years. Surely you can't continue to talk about fucking Kim K and your supercars without people getting bored, right? So what lies beyond that? What more can you do to extend your career that's already long for rap standards and bring new eyes to your likeness? Well, let's look at what previously successful rappers have done so that we can get a scope of what Ye can do. 21 years after Jay-Z's debut album, he dropped 444, which was an amazing album where he talked about his legacy, expanding his business, telling black people they're black, and apologizing for cheating on Beyonce. The album has this closing credits, end of a legacy feel to it, where it felt like this is probably one of the last times that we'll hear from Jay-Z, as it seems like he's kind of flirting with retirement and focusing on business and family instead. And he did. He hasn't dropped an album since. All he's doing now is scamming impressionable black people in his neighborhood with crypto instead of selling them crack, under the guise of selling them crack to buy the neighborhood in order to cleanse the neighborhood of crack and instead replace it with crypto bros. This is a man that's left the rap game before the rap game left him. He knows his musical prime of doing number ones is done, unless he's hitting up Beyonce for features, and so he's moved on to other endeavors while still being considered one of the greatest. This is one way to live out your career, as one of the greats that just doesn't drop any music anymore because he has nothing left to prove. The other way is to be like Eminem and release garbage for years and years and years until your original legacy gets tainted and all the kids think you were ass since the beginning. The problem with Kanye, however, is that he's kind of doing both. He dropped Hail Hitler, where he doubled down for his love of Hitler, and he dropped Cousins, where he said he likes sucking his cousin's dick. And unironically, both of these songs were pretty catchy. Like, they sonically sound pretty good. Gave my cousin head, gave my cousin head, gave my cousin head. But it's pretty obvious that Kanye is never going to retire. Why? Because making an album like 444 or garbage like Eminem, that's anti-fascist. That means you lost touch. That means you don't move people anymore. They're not excited by your words and emotions in that way. And Kanye, well, deep down in his heart, he's a fascist through and through. He can never accept anything other than a desire to be young and beautiful. After all, that's all a fascist wants. The reason Kanye supported Trump in 2016 was because Trump reminded Kanye of Ye. Kanye barely compromised in his pursuit of stardom. He made the music that he wanted to make. He marketed it the way that he wanted to market it. And the people loved it the way that he wanted them to. Just like Donald Trump. Donald Trump has never compromised on his vision. He wanted to build a wall. He wanted to add tariffs. And he wanted that iconic image of his fist up after he got shot by an incel. And he got all of it. He never lost who he was for a political image. That type of personality is unheard of in world politics, except for that one German painter in the 1930s. Donald Trump, and only Donald Trump, had this power where anything he says goes. And that's what Ye, after years of being at the top of the music industry, had the audacity to want as well. That's why he entered politics. As an artist that is universally loved and celebrated and idolized by the entire world, he wanted to leave a mark in the political game. But cult idolization doesn't exist in politics except when it's fascism. So he chose fascism. He chose Trump. Because frankly, the default state of politicians is that we hate them. We think they're lying pigs. We think they're dirty money launderers. Except fascists. Fascists love their politicians. They trust them. They think they're divine. Ye wanted to feel divine, so he brought his artistic ego that had never failed him up until this point into the political marketplace. That's why he sided with the outright and eventually converted a lot of impressionable kids that wouldn't touch politics otherwise to his side as well. Because at the end of the day, this is all he knows. He only knows how to make people fall in love with him with his words and gestures. Fuck policies and plans. That doesn't matter to the artist. In a way, Kanye and Mishima are very similar people, in that all they ever wanted was to be young and beautiful. That's why Mishima killed himself before he could grow old. That's why Kanye is going to continue to consume nitrous and spit garbage into the mic in order to capture the high once again. At its core, fascism isn't about policy, it's about performance. It's about identity and the fleeting nature of youth. Kanye and Mishima both remind us that the artist's true medium is not paint or prose, but feeling, and that feeling can be weaponized as the line between art and politics blurs. This is the same reason why Benito Mussolini considered himself an artist instead of a prophet, and the same reason why people would rather serve crack before their country. Because in the end, the most dangerous revolution is the one that's sold with an Adidas sponsorship. Because the kids will think it's cool. Let me ask you once again, have you ever dreamed of a school shooting happening and you stopping said school shooter with your bare hands and everyone thinks you're a hero and the girl of your dreams hugs you and says, "Oh my God, you did it"? If the answer is yes, you are susceptible to the perils of fascism. You want to experience being a hero at a young age. You want to be cool and liked and be respected by all your peers, and it's frustrating that you can't because you suck at basketball so no one in school pays attention to you. I get it. During the war years, the governments of each country, through the use of propaganda and a call to action, made it so that being cool was representing your country during war. Now it's Trump or Ye or Elon telling you that getting rich and going to Thailand and fucking ladyboys is the new cool, as long as you vote in their favor in the next election. All of these sentiments, whether it's propaganda or hitting nitrous, are written in the language of love. Love makes us do things that we would never imagine, pushes us to extremes that we can't back away from. It has taken me to places I wouldn't dare go with a gun. That's why, even with how problematic Mishima is, PewDiePie is his biggest fan. That's why I scream, "Gave my cousin head, gave my cousin head, gave my cousin head," because it sounds kinda good. Because at its core, fascism springs from a desperate wish to be beautiful, to be romantic, to daydream about a perfect past that never existed, to fantasize about a flawless future that will never come, all while ignoring the messy beauty of the here and now. When you're angry for good reason, the line between righteousness and sin begins to blur. You tell yourself, "I'll do anything to claim what's mine," and suddenly your sins feel sanctified, because you believe you're fighting for something greater than you. That's why every strongman hero in the movies peppers his rage with references to God. He craves forgiveness, because with each person he tramples on his climb to power, he loses a piece of his soul. How can you sleep at night knowing your success requires someone else's ruin? But love and hate are two sides of the same coin. Fascism trades on that twin engine. It offers a twisted kind of devotion, a promise that your love for your nation, race, leader, or idea will fill the void that you've dug inside your soul. And so you sign on the dotted line. You swallow the red pills. You believe the myth that if you just follow the banner, if you love yourself more than others, you'll treat morality itself. You'll be young and beautiful forever. But that promise is a lie. The real trick of fascism is making you fall in love with an illusion that love destroys everything in its path. Because in the end, chasing eternal youth and beauty is a race with no finish line. And the only thing that's truly immortal is the ruin you leave behind. Just like your daydream of stopping a school shooter and getting that girl's graceful hug, fascism sells you a rescue fantasy. You as the perfect hero, swooping in to save a broken world. You imagine yourself standing tall, adrenaline pumping, everyone cheering your name, until you realize you're not saving anyone, not even yourself. The same rush that fuels your daydreams can blind you to the fact that real courage doesn't come from guns or grand gestures, but from facing life's ugly truths head on. And when the smoke clears, you realize that the school shooter was going to miss the shots anyways because he sucks, the girl you like is probably a hoe, and you're going to peak in high school.